This is Clear Politics. Hello, once again, there's tension around one of the world's biggest trade arteries. Things are unsettled again. Official Tehran has announced it is ready to block the Strait of Hormuz if Israel and the US do not stop bombing Iran. It's been quiet for the last couple of days, but who knows what will happen next. The Strait of Hormuz is only 54 kilometers long. It's literally the narrow bottleneck of global energy. 1 in every 5 barrels of oil in the world passes through it. A single blockade, and the price of oil will soar above $150 a barrel.
According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, about 20 million barrels of oil per day passed through the strait in the first half of 2023. That's nearly $600 billion a year.
The situation around the Strait of Hormuz once again proves that trade routes have become a major geopolitical trump card, and sometimes a hostage to big conflicts. Today we'll talk about the world's largest trade arteries, who profits from them, how they're fought over, and why the stability of the global economy depends on just a few straits and canals. We'll give you just the facts. You draw your own conclusions. Global trade stays afloat thanks to the seas and oceans. More goods are shipped by sea than by land and air combined. According to WTO estimates, over 80% of all global cargo is transported by sea. Such shipments are known for being safe and fast. This is the most militarized oil route on the planet. The U.S. Navy has sent forces to the region almost every decade since the 1980s. It's the only sea route from the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. More oil passes through it each year than through the Panama and Suez canals combined. The Strait of Hormuz is controlled by Iran, but literally all oil-producing countries, OPEC members, depend on it. There's a unique feature in the strait's structure. Yes, it's 54 kilometers wide, but only one channel is deep enough for heavy oil tankers, and it's less than 10 kilometers wide.
Some analysts call the Strait of Hormuz a geographic weapon of mass destruction for Iran. If Tehran's merely blocks just the shipping lane for oil tankers, a fuel crisis could erupt in the Western Hemisphere, similar to 1973 when the U.S. literally ran out of fuel.
2 days before the Israeli airstrike on Tehran that killed Major General Hossein Salami, at that time, he was the commander of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. He visited naval units stationed in the Strait of Hormuz. He called the Persian Gulf and surrounding areas one of the Islamic Republic's most important defensive zones. He specifically pointed out high-speed missile boats capable of covering 10 kilometers in less than 3 minutes. According to Salami, these are fast attack boats. He said heavier warships and missiles would be used in defensive operations. He also mentioned anti-ship sea mines as one of the most decisive weapons in naval warfare.
So, if there are more strikes on its nuclear sites, Tehran is ready to fill that 10-kilometer channel with mines. Every month, 3,000 tankers pass through the Strait of Hormuz.
The Strait of Hormuz is very important. It handles 30% of the world's oil traffic. So if it's blocked, of course, prices will skyrocket. Some experts say $200 a barrel, others say $300. It's hard to say, but it would definitely be a serious crisis.
Again, 10 kilometers on which all global trade, oil, weapons, goods, and even regional power depend. And it's not Iran's first time fighting over it. Let's look at history.
In the mid-80s, territorial disputes between Iran and Iraq sparked the tanker war in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. During that conflict, both sides sank 223 tankers.
With this simple tactic, neighbors tried not only to seize territory, but also to privatize the strait and oil exports.
The tanker war had a major impact on global oil markets and threatened international crude oil supplies. This led to serious fluctuations in world oil prices. Instead of pressuring Iraq, Iran's attacks led to intervention by several world powers, including the US, USSR, and some European countries, who wanted to protect their interests in the region and ensure oil supplies from the Persian Gulf. Several foreign armies got involved.
By the way, fearing oil price spikes, the US sent troops to the region. Tankers from Kuwait and other countries sailed under American military escort.
If we're talking about the 1980s, yes, during the Iraq War, the Americans escorted oil tankers. They sent troops into the Persian Gulf, while some U.S. Navy ships entered the area. There's a serious struggle for the Persian Gulf, economic and ideological, mainly between Saudi Arabia and Iran. In almost all Arab countries of the Middle East, the Persian Gulf isn't called the Persian Gulf, but the Arabian Gulf. If you say Persian Gulf there, or in Saudi Arabia, people will look at you very strangely.
At the time of this recording, Iran and Israel are observing a ceasefire. But official Tehran has said that if even one missile lands, the Strait of Hormuz will be blocked. Since 2000, Iran has threatened to close the strait more than 10 times. Speaking of size, it's really a narrow margin. Another key artery of the world, and probably the most famous, the Suez Canal.
This is a man-made waterway about 193 kilometers long, connecting the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. It's been in operation since November 1869. It's the shortest sea route between Europe and Asia. It lets shippers avoid the long trip around Africa. The canal is critical for transporting oil, petroleum products, minerals, and other goods between continents, handling 10 to 12% of all global trade and 30% of all global container shipping.
The canal is in Egypt, but for many years it belonged to Britain. It opened back in 1869. Surprisingly, Israel was also involved in the war over it. In 1956, London and Tel Aviv didn't like that Egypt's president nationalized it.
In response, Britain, France, and Israel launched a tripartite attack on Egypt. During this, Israel invaded the Sinai Peninsula, and British and French troops landed in Port Said at the canal's northern end. Claiming they were trying to separate the warring sides, the UN sharply condemned the intervention, and the USSR threatened military action. As a result, Britain and France, and then Israel, had to withdraw their troops, and the canal returned to Egyptian control, a major political victory for Egypt.
The waterway connected the Mediterranean and Red Seas, making the route from India to Europe 15,000 kilometers shorter. Today, Suez handles 10% of global maritime traffic. About 100 ships pass through it daily. The trade artery brings Egypt about $5 billion a year.
We've already talked about the Ever Given tanker, which paralyzed the canal and global trade in 2021. These days, the sea artery is back in the news, but for another reason. And that reason is Donald Trump.
In April 2025, the U.S. president said Egypt should give American military and commercial ships duty-free passage through the Suez Canal. Moreover, Cairo demanded that Washington deal with the Red Sea. Because of Yemeni Houthi piracy, Egypt loses almost $800 million a month in canal fees.
Like the Strait of Hormuz, the Suez Canal has a little brother, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. It's off the coast of Djibouti in Africa. Basically, it's the gateway to the Red Sea, and then a bit further, the Suez.
A day through Bab el-Mandeb, from $500 million in monetary terms up to $1 billion a day, that's how much cargo and goods move through. At its narrowest, the strait is just 26 kilometers wide, so it's easy to block. Whoever controls the strategic military situation here can create not just a regional crisis, but a global economic crisis.
This strait is so important that Djibouti hosts Russian, Chinese, American, Italian, British, German, and Spanish military bases. The goal is to control global trade and keep competitors from taking over, but the Yemeni Houthis have changed the game.
Since November, Houthi rebels have been attacking merchant ships in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait in solidarity with Hamas. The Houthis control much of Yemen, are backed by Iran, and see Saudi Arabia, the US, and Israel as enemies. They claimed their target was the Israeli merchant fleet. But ships not connected to Israel have also come under drone and missile fire.
In general, any choke point, any strait can be used for geopolitical purposes. It depends on the goals and interests of those who can use this leverage. We remember that the Houthis were very selective in attacking ships. There were about 10 incidents, even though hundreds of ships from different countries, including Chinese, Iranian, and those carrying Russian goods, pass Yemen's shores daily, and the Houthis didn't attack them.
Another stop on our route, this time from the other hemisphere, the Panama Canal, even though the US president insists it's now American. Hundreds of millions of tons of cargo are shipped through this corridor every year.
The canal is especially important for the US. It cut the distance from the country's east to west coast from 22,500 kilometers to 9,500 kilometers. Lower shipping costs. The canal made deliveries to many Pacific countries much cheaper. Most of the cargo is for the US, 71.5% of it. Since it was built, about 2.5% of global maritime trade passes through it each year, including about 40% of US container shipments to China and Japan.
Like the Suez, the Panama Canal is a man-made passage for ships of all types and sizes. It opened in 1914. The French started building it, but the US finished it and proudly claimed it as their own.
Ownership has always been complicated. Until 1979, the Americans ran the canal, but Panama wanted to control the artery on its own territory. The response was typically American. In 1989, President Bush Sr. sent troops to take control of both the country and the canal.
The canal was created solely to improve trade turnover. The country itself was basically created to facilitate international trade and control the canal. The Americans controlled the canal throughout its history. And as long as dictator Noriega was their man, he quietly ran the canal in America's interests. No one bothered him, but as soon as Noriega tried to change the system, he ended up in an American prison, and they kept control of the canal.
Negative feelings toward the US authorities only grew over time. Gradually, this turned into peaceful protests and then clashes with police. In January 1964, protesters organized an anti-American march that turned into a riot with many dead and wounded. In Panama, this event is called Martyrs' Day and became the starting point for revising the country's relationship with the US. In 1977, Panama's representative Omar Torrijos and US President Jimmy Carter signed a treaty to transfer the Panama Canal and an agreement on its permanent neutrality and management. According to these documents, as of December 31st, 1999, the Panama Canal came fully under Panama's jurisdiction.
The main and undeniable advantage of the Panama cluster is the shorter route for goods, meaning savings in time and costs.
The canal allows ships to avoid sailing around Cape Horn, the southern tip of South America, and the Cape of Good Hope, the southern point of Africa. This reduces shipping time and fuel expenses and also helps lessen the environmental impact of global shipping by lowering carbon emissions. For example, the canal cut the sea route from the east to the west coast of the U.S. from 22,500 kilometers to 9,500 kilometers. And the average travel time from Asia to the Atlantic Ocean is about 26 days instead of 39.
And although it was agreed in the late 80s that the U.S. would not interfere in canal affairs, Donald Trump decided otherwise. To start, he demanded duty-free passage for American commercial and military ships. Yes, just like with the Suez Canal. And that's not all.
Earlier in April, U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth visited Panama and announced that the U.S. and Panama had agreed on a treaty for unhindered passage of U.S. military ships through the canal. According to Hegseth, this is a step toward freeing the region from Chinese influence. Trump repeatedly accused Panama's authorities of handing control of the strategically important canal to China. In February, the U.S. State Department said the Panamanian government agreed to waive fees for U.S. government vessels. However, Panama denied this statement.
And it seemed like the U.S. backed off. Trump calls the canal American less and less. But on March 4th, 2025, the reason became clear.
The American investment company BlackRock agreed to buy 2 major Panama Canal ports from their current owner in Hong Kong. The deal was made after U.S. President Donald Trump repeatedly voiced concerns about alleged Chinese influence over this strategic waterway.
BlackRock is the very company that now effectively owns Ukraine and other assets around the world, the so-called shadow world government. From their needle, there's only one way, to oblivion.
A strategic artery is also a serious source of income for the budget. After its upgrade, the Panama facility collects over $2 billion a year in fees. And as the number of large ships grows, this amount will only increase.
Panama is a puppet state that allows the United States, indirectly and sometimes directly through military intervention, as in the 1980s, to control the Panama Canal. It's hard to overestimate the importance of the Panama Canal for world trade. It is enormous, simply because here you can cross through the Americas instead of going around the continent or doing unnecessary loading and unloading in Mexico or some Central American country.
It's hard to imagine Panama starting a war with the U.S. over its own canal. These are the clearest examples of how a narrow isthmus can cost both peace and the world dearly. Technology advances, speeds increase, but a small oil tanker or container ship can still make even the biggest players nervous. So pressure on global arteries will only grow. Take care.